I want to begin by saying two things. One is I've been looking for an influx of new, fresh poskim that we haven't touched upon. And number two, that my son-in-law, Nachi Feldman, pointed out to me that there's a very fine journal that comes out weekly here in Israel. I had never heard of it. I never had access to it. It's called Omek Hapshat, and it is published by an organization called the Hilchita. I can't tell you much about it, but he did send me one copy, one particular Gilyon, and apparently it's very recent, very fresh. And he really, this Gilyon opens my eyes to how many different questions in halacha have arisen over the past period of months, in the light of the coronavirus. I didn't realize that there were so many different issues. The issue that we'll talk about first and foremost, and I'll tell you why, is in those places, and here in Israel, this is very common, where if you enter a public area, which might be a hospital, for example, on Shabbat, you have to visit someone or whatever purpose you have, maybe you're not feeling well. In such a case, they take your temperature before you're allowed to enter it in. Now, in some hospitals here in Israel, they have a non-Jew that does that work. But in most cases, it's probably that the shomer who's at the door of the hospital, and he has to decide whether to let you in or not, he himself will be in charge of taking your temperature. Now, there are a number of different issues that come up over here. First of all, taking temperature on Shabbos, what exactly is the Isur? And it varies between one polar extreme and the other. There's one school of thought that would call it a problem of uvdon dechol. It's a secular kind of thing. It belongs to the mundane days. Another school of thought would put it on a higher level. It's a violation of an Isur Shabbos D'Rabbanan. And finally, we have those who would classify it as a Malacha D'Oraisa, as a biblical prohibition on Shabbos. And many of the poskim point to the fact that these thermometers will show digitally the number of your temperature, and that might be a problem of electricity or of ksiva, of writing. With regard to writing, most poskim would say that at the worst case, this would be a derabanan, because this is not a ksiva shel kayoma, it's a temporary writing. However, with regard to electricity, that's a much more complicated issue that touches on so many aspects of our life in contemporary society with regard to Shabbos. And here we have the Chazon Ish's psak that any form of electricity involves a malacha d'oraisa of boneh, insofar as you complete a circuit. But there are other issues that are more relevant to us, and that is when you enter into a hospital, for example, in this case, and there's going to be a violation of an Isur Shabbos, we can ask who is violating this Isur Shabbos by taking the temperature with the thermometer. It's not you. You're going into the hospital. You're totally passive. It's going to be the shomer. He himself, if he's Jewish, will be, in quotation marks, violating the Isur of whatever it might be, ksiva. It could be classified perhaps as Maka b'patish or Meleches boneh. And the question is, are you responsible for setting up a situation where someone else, another Jew in this case, will violate the Shabbos, whether it be on a D'Rabbanan or a D'Oraisa level? Now, again, if he has the option of going around the corner and there's another entrance to the hospital which he can avail himself of, and there the shomer is not Jewish, that's obviously preferable. But in many cases, the only option that he has is to go to the shomer who is Jewish. Now, I don't know how relevant or how frequent or common this will happen in Chutz La'aretz. In a certain sense, it's a very Israeli kind of shaila. But I could imagine even in Chutz La'aretz, situations where the shomer is taking your temperature and he happens to be Jewish. It could happen. Not only that, even if he's not a shomer Shabbos, and we'll call him a mumar l'chil Shabbos, nevertheless, the question is still very relevant. And this comes under the prohibition called lifnei iver lo sitei michshol, if you cause another Jew to violate the Shabbos. Now, if we lay down the following premises, number one, taking temperature on Shabbos with this thermometer is a violation of Shabbos, of one sort or another, one level or another. Premise number two, the shomer in this case who's taking your temperature is Jewish. Now we get to premise number three, and that is, would you be violating lifnei iver? You yourself are not violating the Shabbos, you're totally passive, but you are causing another Jew perhaps to violate the Shabbos, and therefore we assume under premise number three, you would be violating lifnei iver. And here's where the shaila breaks open. Is there pikuach nefesh? We know that for the sake of saving lives, every single avera in the Torah, with exception of three cardinal sins, is trumped, is overridden. And does your entry into the hospital qualify as pikuach nefesh? Let's break this down into two parts. If you're the choler, you yourself are ill, but because of corona, they won't let you in without first taking your temperature. How ill are you? If you are ill to the point where it could be pikuach nefesh, then there's no question, hands down, you have to go to the hospital. But let's describe a situation where you are not the choler. You are going into the hospital for one of many different possible reasons. You want to visit and take care of one of the cholim. Alternatively, you may be part of the medical staff, and you actually have the knowledge and the know-how to help one of the cholim on a medical basis with therapeutic treatment. Under those circumstances, either A or B, where you're a chola sheyesh bo sakana, or you are visiting a chola sheyesh bo sakana, and you are administering medical treatment, that once again, hands down. No question, it's permissible and obligatory. And we could go even a step further. The shomer himself, who's taking your temperature, is not violating any Isa. So the whole discussion about lifnei iver is a moot point, because if there's pikuach nefesh, then that's not lifnei iver. The shomer, is doing exactly what he has to do, what he's required to do, and he has to override the Shabbos because of pikuach nefesh. But let me talk about a different scenario, and that is going to be a scenario in which you're visiting a choler, you're visiting the ill. Now, the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim is a fantastic mitzvah of the first order, but it would not override the Shabbos. And this particular essay that we want to see today is going to raise the following possibility: that in the light of coronavirus and the situation of patients in the hospital, and as you all know, unfortunately, those numbers are going up here in Israel. You know, they're talking about 80 to 100 people who are now being hospitalized in serious condition. And it could very well be, and we'll touch on this as we go along, that visiting the sick could come under pikuach nefesh. You may be able to help somebody who's in bad straits in many different ways by visiting the person, whether it's psychological, or perhaps even at a critical moment being there to make a decision or to help him if there's no nurse around. There are any number of scenarios where you're not just a mevaker asachola, but it goes beyond that, and it comes under hatzalah, under saving a life. But before we get to that discussion about whether or not visiting the sick in the case of coronavirus might be a situation of pikuach nefesh and hatzalah, let's discuss the following. Supposing you know for sure that you're not a chola sheyesh bo sakana. Therefore, we shift the question over to the shomer who's taking your temperature. Now, you know what he doesn't know. He doesn't know your situation, but you do. And you know you're a cholah she'ein bo sakana. You know that although you need treatment and you need help, but that itself would not override the Shabbos. That could be postponed until Sunday. That's what you know. You also know that you're not a member of the medical staff and you're not going to save lives. Let's assume you also know that although you want to visit the sick or perhaps cheer up someone who has coronavirus and is hospitalized, but you know that your visit is not going to be a lifesaver for you. And now, as we discussed earlier, because you know something that he doesn't know, does that generate a prohibition? Are you required in this case to postpone your visit to the hospital rather than visit on Shabbos because you're putting him in a situation, although he doesn't know about it, of having to violate the Shabbos without a sakana? Your visit is not a matter of sakana, it's not a matter of hatzolas nefesh. And what this essay is going to do, and it's beautiful how he anthologizes all the modern poskim who are Baruch Hashem alive and well. Occasionally he quotes a posek who's gone. There's a school of thought that presents the following argument. Since the shomer who's taking your temperature is unaware of your situation, let's go even beyond that. He knows that within the hospital, there are many patients who are in very dangerous situations. Their lives are in peril. And the last thing in the world that would happen, hopefully would not happen, would be that somebody who has coronavirus would enter into the hospital and infect patients. And those are patients who might be in a life-threatening situation. And even if they're not, if they contract the disease, this infection, they may become a cholah sheyesh bo sakana. The government and the Ministry of Health will require that no one enters into the hospital without being, again, let's not get into the cynical attitude that what difference does it make if he has temperature, he doesn't have temperature, nothing is actually established. But we'll grant that we'll give the dog a bone and we'll grant the premise that the health administration is going to limit and decrease the percentages of possibility statistically that somebody might come in and infect others by taking the temperature. If I grant you that, let's go back to the shomer. The shomer doesn't know to differentiate between Yankel, Beryl, or Sarah Rivka Leah, he doesn't know who's coming in. He's got to protect all the sick people who are hospitalized to make sure that no one comes from the outside who can infect others. Therefore, he is required to take the temperature of every single person who enters into the hospital. And under that assumption, his matzav, his situation, vis-a-vis taking temperature, is pikuach nefesh. So I just want to read to you, again, for some people who I have on the email list, I was able to attach this essay, which is 4 pages long. I'm on the first page right now, if you happen to have it. And again, if at any point you want to join the email list, I will send you, hopefully I can't always do this, but send you the relevant text beforehand. And he writes that on the one hand, Hamavaker, the one who's visiting and is entering into the hospital, and he's not in a sakana, Goreim labodek levatzeach Hil Shabbos b'miuchad avuro. The Chil Shabbos that he checked someone else and took that person's temperature is irrelevant. He's now going to take your temperature, and you're causing him Chil Shabbos. Kasher maf'il et hamachshir l'tzorach habdika. So that once the digital number of your temperature, of your body temperature, now appears on this machshir, on this little thermometer, he has violated the Shabbos specifically because you came in. You're the one who caused him to do this Chil Shabbos. And after he says Hatzad Isur, the reason why we should be very careful about this is because of Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Michshol and what's called Misayel Over Avera. You facilitate someone's violation of the Torah. But he writes, Hatzad Lahatir, and this is the third paragraph on page 1, if you happen to have it. He who's taping the temperature, lo over Isa. You can't be considered a gorem, a cause for someone Isa Messiah, unless he will be violating the Shabbos and doing an Isa. He's not doing an Isa. Ela osek b'mitzvah shel hatzolos nefashos. He is obligated to take temperature because he is involved in saving lives. Shemonea, he prevents. Knisat chole corona, anyone who might have contracted this disease. Umonea sacholim hamuushpazim mihidabkut, and he's now protecting the well-being of those who are hospitalized. That's called mushpaz in Hebrew, and he may be protecting their very lives. And the truth be told, I mean, this is just an editorial comment. I am so absolutely convinced in the logical, compelling argument of the Tzad Lahatir that I honestly don't understand the Shaila to begin with. To me, it's a dead giveaway. It's an open and shut case. You can't tell me that I violated Lifnei Iver if he himself is obligated to take my temperature. And he has to do that and violate the Shabbos because of the Pikuach Nefesh to protect the Cholim Mushpazim. What's the deal here? And the man is going to spend 3 pages summarizing a host of tshuvas that have been written in the last few weeks, or maybe even days, going back and forth on this issue. So again, just to summarize, again, I'm giving you a little bit of a prejudice here, and it's my take on this. I don't get the shaila to begin with. All right, so you're not a chol. Sheyesh bo sakon. But where's the Lifnei Iver if he's taking the temperature and he has to do so because of Pikuach Nefesh? Yeah, Joe.
Would you not say Lifnei Iver is always when you know something that that person himself doesn't?
Okay, excellent point. How do we understand Lifnei Iver? Does Lifnei Iver mean A or B? A is that I know that he's violating an avera. Or B, is it that even though he's not violating an avera, I know that if he knew what I know, he would be violating an avera. If you go with the first approach, that Lifnei Iver means I know that he's violating an avera, he's not violating an avera. But if you're going to say, well, I know what he doesn't know, and had he known what I know, he would be violating an avera, then the act of Chil Shabbos, if I can use a little brisker terminology here, is a Maisa avera with a Ptur Ones, which means that the individual who is taking your temperature, he may be totally unaware of your situation. And insofar as he's doing the job that he has to do, he has worried about the klal, he's an anus. But facts on the ground might be that you know whatever you have to know, and if he knew everything that you knew, there would be no justification to violate the Shabbos. Now, personally, I don't know why. Maybe they just don't have the time for this, but there are documents today that could possibly prove that you cannot infect anyone else. Like, imagine if you took a test for coronavirus the very morning of let's say Friday afternoon, you got the results and you're negative. It would be a very interesting kind of policy if the hospital would say, you know what, this guy has a document from the health department that he just tested negative. Let him in without taking his temperature. Again, I don't know technically if you could engineer such a thing. There may be enormous problems in doing so. So we're going to have to grant right now the following: that you may know that you cannot infect anybody, but he doesn't know that. And then you get to the question of Lifnei Iver. Now, the one who actually wrote a long tshuva way back when about a similar situation was Rav Moshe Feinstein. And Rav Moshe assumes that if you know something that he doesn't know, and he is a getter of onus, you're not allowed to put him into a situation where he will violate the avera that you know about, even though he doesn't know anything about it. He's an onus. However, although the poskim here that he quote, they all bring down this tshuva Rav Moshe, I personally think that there's no proof from Rav Moshe at all. Rav Moshe is not talking about a pikuach nefesh situation. If the shomer who's guarding the gates is taking temperature because for him, he is violating the Shabbos because of pikuach nefesh, that's not onus. That's not a situation where he's being forced to violate the Shabbos. That's a situation where he has pikuach nefesh, and he is obligated, therefore, to take the temperature. So where's the Lifnei Iver? As I go back to my original point, you are causing him to violate the Shabbos. There's no violation of the Shabbos here. Pikuach nefesh is not the same as onus. Onus means somebody forced me to violate the Shabbos. I violated the Shabbos. Pikuach nefesh is not the same. Pikuach nefesh is not an aver at all. And I'll prove it to you. If, let's say, I was violating the Shabbos b'onus, if I had the possibility of minimizing the Chil Shabbos by doing it with my left hand instead of my right hand, stand on my head, do it b'shinui, all that would be highly recommended, but not so in the case of Pikuach Nefesh. The Mechaber Paskins in Shulchan Aruch that in the case of Pikuach Nefesh, don't look to your left, don't look to your right, don't try to do shinui, don't try to get a guy, do it yourself. And Afilu Gadol B'Yisrael, the greatest of all, has to go ahead and violate the Shabbos. This is a case of what we call hutra. Hutra means it's not that you're violating the Shabbos and you did a Ma'aseh Avera and now you need kapara, you have to atone yourself, but you were allowed to do it because of onus, because of circumstances beyond your control. No. We're talking about a case where the halacha requires you to violate the Shabbos. That's not called a Ma'aseh Avera at all. That doesn't need kapara. On contrary, the Chil Shabbos itself is a mitzvah. Do you hear that, Rabbosai? The Torah is asking you to desecrate the Shabbos. My Rebbe used to always tell the story, which my father, Zichron Livracha, heard from Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, my Rebbe's father. And my father said he heard it twice during his 5 years in Rav Moshe's shir. And every time, Rav Moshe said it the exact same way. And little Yasha Ber, at that time, who was an infant, was sick with high fever. And they brought over the physician. At that time, Rav Moshe was in Brisk. And in the presence of son, father, and grandfather, 3 generations, the doctor said, you have to lower the lamp. They had kerosene lamps. And Reb Chaim turns to Reb Moshe and he says, lower the lamp. because the baby has temperature, very high temperature, very dangerous. So Moshe starts shaking. He doesn't know what to do. I mean, his father's telling him to lower the lamps. I don't know why Reb Chaim himself didn't do it. I can't answer that. That's one part of the story I can't figure out. So Reb Moshe, and my father said every time he told the story, at that point in the story, Reb Moshe would pick up his foot, bang it down, and Reb Chaim said, "I'm a arstu bistu." He called Reb Moshe, his own son, an ignoramus. When there's pikuach nefesh, then we don't hesitate. And therefore, I have my doubts, honestly, Lefielius Daiti, whether or not there should be an issue of Lifnei Iver when the Shomer is doing his job for the sake of protecting the health, and in this case, a very dangerous situation, if there's going to be a spread of the infection in the hospital. And my friends, the same thing could apply to an old age home. Under certain circumstances, it might happen in a synagogue. And perhaps instead of the synagogue having a shomer taking temperature and violating the Shabbos, maybe they should just close the synagogue for Shabbos. I don't know. But there's much more to this essay than what I shared with you until now. He wants to know the following. And this you'll see on page 2. He says the following, that if the bodek who's taking the temperature is a Jew, then we have to somehow introduce an element here of pikuach nefesh. He suggests the following. And this is in paragraph number 6, which is on the bottom right, for those who have the text. And he speaks about a chole she'ein bo sakon. What are the laws with regard to a chole she'ein bo sakon? He says the following. A Jew enters into the hospital. They take his temperature, make sure that he could not infect anyone with coronavirus. And he comes in with tzorach tipul she'ein bo sakon. He says the following, that with regard to a chole she'ein bo sakona, we have the following laws. Law number 1 is that we do not violate the Shabbos for a chole she'ein bo sakona. Law number 2, if we can combine A plus B, A, that we're not talking about a violation of Shabbos to Oraisa, but rather it's the Rabbanon, and B, if he does it b'derech shinui, in an unusual kind of way, then it's mutter for a chole she'ein bo sakon. So again, let's go over it. We're dropping the level of Chil Shabbos from a Doraisa to a Drabanan, and we're doing it b'derech shinui. Then we have a third category, which is a chole sheyesh bo sakonas aver, that one of the limbs of his body is in danger. In such a case, we will violate an Isur D'Rabbanan, assuming his life is not in danger, and we don't need a shinui. Now, in the case of taking temperature with a thermometer, a digital thermometer, and the case is a chole she'ein bo sakona, and we've assumed now that taking the temperature on Shabbos is a violation of Shabbos, we need chole sheyesh bo sakona. What do we do in the case of a chole she'ein bo sakona? Are we telling him don't go into the hospital because you're not in danger of losing your life? And the answer is, according to most poskim, and it's a very sensitive issue, we are dealing with a violation of Shabbos, which is only d'Rabbanan, because the ksiva, the writing, digital writing, is only temporary. And number 2, this is an unusual form of writing. All this, my friends, puts electricity on the side. Once we introduce the Chazon Ish, who maintains that electricity is like closing a circuit is binyan, then everything we're about to say now falls by the wayside. But if we assume that the issue here with the temperature of the thermometer is ksiva, then it's ksiva d'Rabbanan and it's with a shinu. And then you'd be allowed to enter even if you're a chole she'ein bo sakha. Now, in the middle of this discussion, he has a very fascinating sort of digression, and he talks about a mashgiach kashrus. And he wants to enter into the hospital to guarantee that the food is kosher. That's an Israeli kind of situation, by and large. But here in Shari Tzedek and in many other hospitals, we have a mashgiach kashrus. He wants to say the following. For him to go in, he's not a chola, he's perfectly healthy. The shomer is a Jew, he's going to take his temperature. He wants to say it's mutter. Why? Because he is preventing the violation of many different isurim, in this case of kashrus. And therefore, if we weigh, on the one hand, this one violation of an isur d'Rabbanan of ksiva b'Shabbos by taking the temperature with a digital thermometer, against, on the other side, all of the isurim that kashrus isurim that this mashgiach is trying to prevent, then he says there's no doubt that it's mutter. And add, the poskim always like to add different what's called snifim, branches, to try to create a heter. Add to that the shomer has to take everyone's temperature because anyone could potentially be carrying this virus. So there's pikuach nefesh. So if you add these two elements together, then he says it's mutter. However, visiting the kotel, he quotes a long tshuva from one of the rabbis, Rav Shmuel Rabinovich, who wants to say that if they don't allow you to come into the kotel amaravi without taking your temperature, and if the bodek is Jewish, then he says that's a serious problem. Because he says, Yesh b'kach mishum lifnei iver, and he doesn't think that the same push that we can have for a hospital, that, there may be someone spreading the virus and causing the death of people, doesn't think that that's so pushing and urgent. And therefore, by your entering into the Rachmat HaKotel, you are being over lifnei iver, and therefore, Ainli Kanis b'Shabbos, he says he doesn't want you to go to visit the Kotel on Shabbos. Now, he doesn't quote any other tshuvas here, but I found this pretty fascinating, that if they require your temperature to be taken before you go to the Kotel, and the person who's taking your temperature is Jewish, then you should not go to the Kotel on Shabbos. I mean, that's going to make many people very sad. People who have a tendency of expressing that, for me, it's not Shabbos if I can't daven at the Kotel. In the last paragraph on this page 2, he quotes from Moshe Feinstein, who says that even if someone is forced to violate the Shabbos, he does an Isur under duress, then you violate lifnei iver if you cause him to violate the Torah under ones. And he wants to apply this to a case of pikuach nefesh, and therefore it's us. Now, if you turn to page 3, it's very nice, and I'm just getting familiar with this alon for the first time in my life. He has, at the end of the article, a very short summary, just 1 minute, of all his conclusions. So I wanted to just, before we open up for questions, just to read this summary. He says the following. Number 1, Chil Shabbos Litzorech Chole. If it's a Chole Sheyesh Bo Sakana, we violate the Shabbos. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins, it's better if the Jew violates the Shabbos to save a Chole. He'll do the best job. And there's always going to be a little bit of a fear that if you give it to a guy, he might not be as careful as you would be, which always reminds me of the famous story about the Beis HaLevi. They were trying to determine at one point in the history of Tsarist Russia who should represent the Jewish people on a very important issue that had to do with Torah learning in the government, to the secular government. And there were two candidates. One was an excellent speaker, and he was very wealthy, a very prominent member of the community. The other one was a Ben Torah. He was dedicated to the study of Torah, and he wasn't rich at all. He wasn't so prominent in the community. He wasn't even a great speaker. And the Beis HaLevi said, send the latter, the second fellow. And when they all asked him why, and what gave him the basis for that conclusion, he quoted a Gemara in Bava Metzia. The Gemara in Bava Metzia says that if you send an object that's made of gold into the hands of a person to watch the object, and it is silver plated, he's only chayav if he loses it with negligence to pay the value of a silver object, because he's under the impression that it's silver. He's only going to give you the shmira to protect it at the level of silver, not at the level of gold. And therefore, the Beis HaLevi said, let's send this Jew because he's a great Talmud Chacham. He loves Torah. He'll do the best job that anyone could do because he knows how to recognize gold. But the other fellow, he may be very prominent, but it's only silver. So therefore, I would say that the Shulchan Aruch says you want to get a doctor, physician to take care of someone whose life is in danger, send a Jew. For him, it's gold. He'll do whatever he can at the speed of light to try to save the chol. But if the chol is the chol she'ein bo sakana, then we're going to allow malachos d'Rabbanan b'shinui, and it's very possible that a Jew who takes the temperature, the thermometer, and with this moded chom, he allows you to enter into the hospital. It could very well be, he says, that you can only allow this in a case of pikuach nefesh, in a case of a chol sheyesh bo sakana, when he really needs desperately hospital care to save his life, or alternatively, if you can argue that there's no electricity problem for whatever reason, and it's only a ksiva problem that reduces it to a drabara with a shinui, then even a chol she'ein bo sakana would allow. He has a very interesting statement in Chazal about a chole, and they needed a certain medication. 10 people rushed to bring the chole that medication. And as soon as they got the first batch, they were able to save the chole. The other 9 people were not aware of this, and they all violated the Shabbos in order to bring this drug to the chole. And Chazal say that not only are they patur, they didn't violate the Shabbos, but they'll get schar. They will be duly rewarded, even though Lamaisa, in actuality, their efforts were in vain because they didn't in any way help the chola. The chola was already back to health.
They draw that from the Rosh Chodesh, the people walking for Rosh Chodesh?
So that's the case, I think, of Mila, when Mila's Docha Shabbos, and they didn't heat up the water before Shabbos, and many people went ahead and heated up the water. I didn't get a chance to research that. You could take a look when you get a chance in these pages.
No, I was saying...
But there was somebody, Joe, who wanted to ask a question before, and I sort of pushed them off, if you don't mind.
That was me also.
No, I think there were... Bobby, you wanted to ask a question, no? No? Okay, I made a mistake.
No, my question was, did he make any differentiation between battery operated and electricity?
Right. Well? So that's a truth from Moshe Feinstein. I'm not sure if he has it in this Gillion again. You know, this is just one Gillion. Now, if you turn to page 4, I found a few interesting things on page 4. Number 1, a person needs to be checked for coronavirus. And it's a Friday, and he knows that in the lab, they're going to, because they have to give the results within 24 hours, they are going to violate the Shabbos in the lab because of his corona test. And again, without going to all the details, I was fascinated by this question about taking a corona test on Friday. And his final tshuva is that you're not allowed to do that, that you should postpone it until Sunday. Now, the chiddush here is that by postponing it till Sunday, he's going to have to add another day of quarantine. And as a result, it's going to have an impact on many, many other different people. And what I'm waiting for, maybe it'll be in the next Gilyon, if I can get myself on the list for this Omek Hapshat. But this is what I'm really holding out from. Here in Israel, they track you down if you've tested positive for corona. And again, they use different methods. Most of them have to do with the telephone, if you know about the Shabak. And they will therefore decide who has to go into quarantine. And basically it means anyone who is anywhere in contact with you before you tested positive. Now, what happens if you know that you were in contact with someone who tested positive, but you have every reason to believe that you did not get infected? For example, you in the past may have contracted the disease. Now, if you call up the health department and notify them that you were in contact with someone who was me'umat, which means that he got the results positive, then you'll have to go into quarantine. Now, imagine the situation of someone who is barely eking out a living, and they have private clients. If they have to go into quarantine, forget it. Close shop. Now, in Yiddish, we have a phrase, mach nicht wissen. Sometimes the less you know, the better you're off. Can a person say, well, I don't know that I'm positive? Or the flip side, does Jewish ethics require that you notify everyone who was with contact with you since the moment that you were in contact with that person who tested positive? How far do you have to go? He has another interesting child here on page 4. He wants to know if a certain family in the neighborhood tested positive for corona, and as a result of the fact that they didn't know that they would test positive, they circulated throughout the neighborhood, and many other families were infected. And again, this is so classic here in this part of the world. I don't know what's going on in your part of the world, because there are no symptoms in most cases, and for some reason you find out that you're positive. And as a result, many people in the neighborhood were infected. This is what happened in New Rochelle, if you're familiar with the story. Thank God the person who carried it is now out of danger. In any event, nothing here points to any negligence. There was no one was at fault over here. This person, man or woman, had no idea that he or she was a carrier, but as a result, spread the virus throughout the neighborhood. And again, as I tell you, this is Ma'asim B'chol Yom. It's going on here 1,000 times a day. And the question is, Hayim mutar l'saper, are you allowed to tell other people that so-and-so was the original cause, the source of sources for this whole mess up in the community where so many people have now tested positive? Is this considered Lashon Hara? If it's L'to'eles, if somebody could be protected by it, but again, why do you have to know who is the guy? What difference does it make to you if you know it was Ploni Almoni who started generating this whole balagan of infection, this avalanche? But on the other hand, even if I grant you it's not L'to'eles, that doesn't make it Lashon Hara, because Lashon Hara always entails a gnat that you recite, that you say over something that is embarrassing to a person or puts him in a negative light. But in this case, Hareza Onis Gomer, he says, it's Lo Yadu Shem Cholim. This family had no clue. There were no symptoms. There was no hit rashlut, no negligence. And he quotes a gigantic machlokas haposkim about it. Have you violated Lashon Hara? He quotes Rav Yehuda Rutner, who's of the opinion that Ein kan gnai v'Lashon Hara, and therefore this is not a violation. He still, discourages you for spreading the word because maybe it's uncomfortable for the person that everybody, points to him when he walks down the street and says, "Oh, you're the one." And then he quotes another posek, Rav Gamliel Rabinovich. Again, I'm not familiar with these poskim, and he thinks that maybe there is a violation of Lashon Hara. He quotes the Chafetz Chaim that even if there's a possibility that there was some element of ashma, of negligence, again, it might have to do with whether or not it was a sipur, the kavanah knows you intended to sort of spread the word and let people know, as opposed to a case of b'derech hakroi, that it just came up in conversation in passing. And then he goes on and asks, is the listener allowed to accept this piece of information, this gossip, that so-and-so was the one who spread the virus? Because if it's Lashon Hara, then you're not allowed to accept it. Now he has another shaila here. All this is on page 4. And he wants to know if witnesses at a wedding, I was just at a wedding a few days ago. Ira Wolfish married off his daughter. I had a front seat, by the way, right here on my computer. And I was curious as to whether or not the Eidim were going to wear masks. Now, truth be told, to the best of my knowledge, almost no one at that wedding was wearing a mask. So I don't know. I don't want to be motzi laz on the city of Toronto, but here in these parts, we're a little bit more careful. Maybe because it's more dangerous here now that we have a second wave. Rahman al-Islam. But the bottom line is the Eidim were not wearing masks. But here in Israel, the shaila came up. And once again, it became a tremendous machlokas whether or not the witnesses are allowed to be wearing masks. And the one who's very careful about this is the Rosh Yeshiva here of a yeshiva called Nesiv Hadas. His name is Rav Schreiber. And he says that you must, meaning the Masada Kedusha must mandate the Eidim to take off their masks, because otherwise it's called Eidus She'iyat Yochel Azima. Now, we have to understand that Kedushin requires what's called Eidus L'Kiyum Adover. And Eidus L'Kiyum Adover means that the Eidim have to be there critically to see the action, otherwise it has no impact. And it's not valid. Not only that, Eidus L'Kiyum Adover requires Eidus Yochel Azima, which means that another two witnesses could come in and testify against them that we saw them and they weren't there at the scene of the crime. And that's based on the predicate that you can recognize the Eidim. And if they're wearing masks, you cannot recognize the Eidim. That's what Rav Schreiber says. Comes along Rav Bunim Zilberberg. Again, these are all fresh new names for me. And he says that there's no need for telling the Eidim that they have to remove their masks. Mutar li'edim lilbosh masecha. And he quotes a Maisa Shahaya. I don't know if you've heard of Rabbi Avram Yoshua Soloveitchik, who is now it's the main Brisker Yeshiva. There are many, many Brisker Yeshivas, and he writes in the name of Rav Avram Yoshua that when he was Masada Kedushin, he made sure that the Chassan and Kala would be wearing their masks. Wow, that's a brisker for you. that the chas and kala should be wearing their masks. And based on this, Rav Zilberberg wants to say that the Eidim should be wearing masks as well, which means that you can identify a person and the Eidim is kosher even when they're wearing masks. Now, personally, I would add the following footnote. Again, I don't know if I'm correct, but there's a sugya in Masechta Ksubos called Yotzeis Bihinuma. And the underlying premise of that sugya is that sometimes you could recognize what's going on based on circumstantial evidence. And here I would make a distinction between the chas and kala and the Eidim. In the case of the chas and kala, to testify that they got married, I don't care if they're wearing a mask. And here I'm totally behind the brisker chumrah, let them wear a mask. I hope when they go home, they'll take off the mask. Right? But as far as the Eidim is concerned, they can wear the mask. But in the case of Eidim, I don't know if it's so easy to recognize the Eidim. Now, of course, you have the MC who says, so-and-so will please come forward. The Rav Masada tells the Chassan to be miyached Eidim. These two are your Eidim to the exclusion of everyone else. But who else in the audience could actually testify that these two people are these two people and identify them? If it's a very small wedding, and everybody knows who the Eidim are, they're wearing clothes, and he's wearing a blue shirt and a yellow shirt, maybe that would be enough, like Yotzis B'Inuma, I don't know. But in any event, the tzutzdel here, the equation between the chas and kala wearing masks and the Eidim wearing masks is a bit of a stretch, in my humble opinion. So Rabbosai, I want to move on for the few minutes that we have left to another Gilyon, another question that's being addressed here in the same Omek HaPshat. And what I'd like you to do, and I'll try to do this along with you, is to go through this essay that we just, hopefully you have it because I sent it as an attachment. If you didn't get it, let me know. And I basically went, out of the 4 pages, I did pages 1 and 4, and very superficially did pages 2 and 3. So if you get a chance, please go through that, and we'll probably find some fine-tuned points that we want to pick up next time. But now I want to go on to another few issues that are here in the Omek HaPshat. And this you don't have, because I just got it now. Number 1, they're requiring a ceiling, a limit of 10 people in the synagogue. Now, I'm not sure right now in Israel, I think they allow 19 people. How they come up with these numbers, I don't know. But be that as it may, and it's not really relevant to the question itself, they have a very limited number of people who have gathered together as a tzibur, and it's a Monday, it's a Thursday, it's a Shabbos. They want to take the Sefer Torah out of the shul and bring it to the place where the tzibur is gathered, simply to read the Torah on that particular day alone, and then return the Sefer Torah back to the shul. And he begins his answer by quoting the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kuf Lamed Hey with the Mishnah Berurah. Asur lahavi Sefer Torah l'shas hakriya bilvad. We are not allowed to take a Sefer Torah out of its place, out of the Aron, simply for the moment of kriya. And he says, even if you have someone who's chavush bebeis ha'asurim, and even if it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the same prohibition applies. And at this point, I would have said, open and shut, it's absolutely forbidden to take the Sefer Torah out. But here's the punchline. Mutar l'taltil es Sefer Torah. He allows you to take the Sefer Torah out. Again, quoting various contemporary live posting. And he says the following. That let's say you had a case of Asara Chavushin. There are 10 people in jail. In such a case, this is not called a zilzul in the Sefer Torah. Lo licha el atzibur shel asar anoshim setrichim leSefer Torah. Ki kvoda shel sefer. It is a covet for the sefer that the sefer goes out to a tzibur that has no possibility of coming to the sefer. In other words, the real McCoy covet sefer would be let the tzibur go to the sefer. Right? The mountain has to come to Mohammed. But in a case where it's impossible for the tzibur, their chavushim, to come to the Sefer Torah, then Adarab will let the Sefer Torah go out to the tzibur. Lachein mutul etaltel es Sefer HaTorah lechol makovos hatfilah sheyesham tzibur shel asara sheman nusim v'enam yechol lispalel b'beis haknesses. So if there are nusim, there are circumstances beyond their control, and they absolutely cannot come to shul, we're allowed to take the Sefer Torah out for the benefit of this tzibur of the 10 people who are in need of a Sefer Torah. Next shiloh, also very fascinating. I can find it. A minute here. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna, because we're pressed for time, I'm gonna just tell you from memory what I saw here in this. Oh, how do you like that? We found it. Listen to this. He titles this tshuva Lo Matzliach Lahariach. It is quite common that a coronavirus patient, and this is true, by the way, even after recovery, that he's not capable of smelling. He loses his sense of smell. And we're talking now about Havdalah on Motzi Shabbos. Now, there are a number of different shilas over here. One is not even a shilah at all, open and shut. He cannot make a bracha Borei B'Samim for himself. So if he's alone and he doesn't have the ability to smell the B'Samim, and this is common now in the Corona period, forget about making Borei B'Samim, he'll make Havdalah without Borei B'Samim. But supposing he's not alone, there are others around him who could smell. So he is a shakaru. And he based himself on a Mishnah Berurah in Siman Reish Tzadi Zayin. The Mishnah Berurah says the following. Wow, this is exciting for me. I know it sounds like such a secondary issue compared to some of the other issues, but I love this. It's beautiful. He says the following. Who's there hearing his Havdalah? Here's the two possibilities. One is Ishto Ubanav Hagedolim, his wife and his sons, his children who are past bar mitzvah. And the other is Banav Haktanim. But listen to this, Higiu Lechina. In which of these two scenarios, these two categories, can he make the bracha Borei B'nei B'Samim? Guess what? Only in the case of a katan, shegiya l'chinuch. Why? Because the halacha is that for a purpose of chinuch, you're allowed to recite a bracha with shemu malchus to teach the child a bracha. But in the case of his wife and his children, he's not allowed to make the bracha for them because the rule is that in a birchas hanenim, there's no law of yotza motzi, meaning I can't be motzi you in a birchas hanenim. You have to recite the bracha yourself. That's part one. Now we go on to part two. Birech Havdalah li'atzmo, o lahotzi rak b'nei beisa agdolim, ubirech al habesamim, which means that since he cannot make the bracha on their behalf, he cannot make the bracha on his own behalf because he doesn't have the capability of smelling the besamim. It's a bracha levatol. And now, The question is, does he have to go back and start Havdalah all over again? Why? Because now the Bore Mine Besamim is a hefsek. The Yavarech Shuv Bore Pri Hagofen. And once again, he quotes a tshuva from Rabbi Kivega, which is quoted by the Mishnah Brura in Bir Alocha, in Simon Reish Sadiches. Shem Birech al Haner Shalosh Shavas. Okay, this has to do with the laws of Yom Kippur, but in any event, the case was that he recited a bracha on the Ner Bori Moria Eish that was a bracha levatollah. Tzorech lachzor ulevarech bori pri hagofen. He's got to start from the beginning. Therefore, im himshich v'siyem es birchas havdalah. Oh, now we have another question. He recited bore mine besamim, and it was a bracha levatollah. Now, Yevorech Bore Pri Hagofen, so he lost the Bore Pri Hagofen because of the hefsek. And he says now he can go ahead. Just let me read this to you. He says, Siyem es birchas havdalah, Yevorech Achshav Bore Pri Hagofen. Oh, so now he recited Bore Mine B'Samim, and he's got to go back to Bore Pri Hagofen. So he recited another Bore Pri Hagofen. And he had already recited Baruch HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. So let's get the Seder. He recited Bore Pri Hagofen. He recited Bore Minei B'Samim and Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. Now he finds out that his bracha of Bore Pri Hadama was a bracha levatol. He goes back and he recites Bore Pri Hagofen. Does he have to recite again Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol? And he says, Lo Yavdil Shuv. He doesn't have to make another Avdol. All he needs is Shtiyas HaKos, and the Kos is now Chal on the bracha of Hamavdil. And this is based on a principle in Masechta Shabbos, in Tosfos, who says, Seder brachos eina ma'akif. That his Seder is not ma'akif. So even if he made a bracha levatollah in his Bore Minei B'Samim, that's not a problem. Okay. Now, we ran out of time.
According to what you're saying, just every Shabbos, every Motzei Shabbos, everybody should make their own Bore Minei B'Samim?
That's what it comes out from his tshuva. As far as I know, that's not the minhag. I don't know what your minhag is, but my minhag is that we all are yotzei Bore Minei B'Samim. And the answer to that is the same answer as to the Bore Pri Hagofen. Why is it that my Bore Pri Hagofen is chal for you in Kiddush and maybe even Avdollah? And the answer is, as my Rebbe used to always say in the name of Reb Chaim, that these brachas become part of the Seder HaMitzvah and it gets upgraded to the status of a Birchas HaMitzvah. But if you don't follow that minhag, then if you don't have the sense of smell, he points out that during coronavirus, it became quite popular to have all sorts of occasions out under the sky, whether it's weddings or other kinds of things. And he says, because of the hot weather, tzarech lifkoch einayim b'mishneh zehirut, we got to be doubly careful. Livdok b'chol dvar machol u'mishta. Don't just take from the shmog and put it into your mouth. Shema yikonsu b'hem zvuvim yitushim shar shrotzim. He says that if it's outdoors, there may be small little bugs that will creep into the food because of the heat. And he says that this is a very serious problem. So forget about what your minhag is in terms of bedikas toloim, but in this case, you have to be bodek toloim. Now, before I let you go, I would like to ask you if you're interested in the next topic, which I found very interesting, and I'll send you the Marmakomos if you're interested. And it's called Bitul Hazmana, which means that you entered into some sort of contractual agreement, and you now want to back out because of coronavirus. And the question is, in a rental situation, he talks about ordering a catering, whether or not you have to pay for that, and if you do, how much do you have to pay? Are those contracts binding, or does a person have to say that I didn't enter into this agreement, knowing that there would be such an epidemic, I'd have to cancel the entire event? And he has another tshuva about paying teachers. Do the teachers have a right to demand full payment when for months and months they were not teaching? So let me know if that topic interests you. If it does, it certainly interests me, and that would be something that I see there's a lot of shuvas about that. Okay, then. So I will wish you a meaningful fast tomorrow. We should be zocheh to the rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash, and thank you all for joining me for today's show.
Just a funny anecdote about smell, lack of smell. The coronavirus creates very serious problems, of course, but it also, so my son, one Friday night, he comes home and he's, sits down to the meal to start eating, and his wife is a good cook and all this, and he starts eating and he says, I don't know what happened this week. She didn't, the food doesn't taste good.
Right.
I don't know. And of course he never got tested, but we're quite sure he had the virus.
Bobby, don't even bother testing him. I can promise you he had the virus.
It was just funny, he was like, well, what happened? She didn't cook properly,
I have to tell you, Bobby, sorry, I am actually going through the same thing now. And my wife is asking me, this is something very special. How come you're not jumping from the ceiling? And I tell her I have about maybe 50% of my sense of smell. And it's amazing how much the sense of smell influences your ability to taste something.
Right.
Okay, then.
All right. Have a good day. Shkoyach.
You too. Have a great day and a meaningful fast.
Shkoyach. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.